You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, James Bond in Never Say Never to Her Majesty's Secret Service. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and yes, Mr. Bond, I expect you to talk, because it's a podcast.
I'm Adam Thomas, and you've had your shiksh.
Yes, and Adam, we are not alone here. We have a guest with us today, a guest who's been on several episodes of the show, one of our favorites, Mr. Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, welcome, and nice tux with the bow and everything. No one's going to see it, but I'm glad you dressed up for the recording.
Yeah, I look really nice. I like to think I'd be the first redheaded James Bond. Actually, guys, this is the announcement. I hate to break it to you right now, but I figured it'd be good for content and airplay. I'm actually replacing Daniel Craig after No Time to Die.
Exactly what everyone wanted.
Yep, I agreed to do it in 2019, and we're going to announce after the movie comes out, theoretically next week. But also maybe never.
Yeah, that's a fairly good point to mention, is that we're doing James Bond this week as our topic. For every single topic, every episode, we cover a good and a bad feature. And so James Bond is the topic in alleged closeness to No Time to Die. Admittingly, this will be coming out the last week of September 2021, so it's a bit before the alleged current release date of October 8th, but as of September 24th at 9:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when we're recording this, it's still supposed to come out on that date. That might have changed by the time this has come out.
Might have been changed by the time you finish that sentence.
That's true.
I do have a James Bond push notification on my phone just in case.
Of course you do, Kaycee. Obviously, anyone who's listened to the show before, especially episodes you've done, would know you like older things. You're an old soul, as the kids might say. And so along with, say, a Star Trek, which you've been on, or we talked about like the AFI Classic Movies list, or we talked about Casablanca on that episode, you also are a pretty big fan of Mr. James Bond, one of the longest running franchises in cinematic history.
What can I say? I like pretty ladies shooting guns in 60s fashion in 60s sets. Nor the fact that my favorite Bond isn't from the 60s, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. But just a few tidbits if you were unaware. James Bond's been running for 26 films ever since Dr. No came out in 1962. So that's 59 years, making it the second longest running franchise behind only Godzilla. And in terms of box office gross, all the Bond movies have grossed a total of $7 billion, which is the third most successful franchise of all time, only beaten by Star Wars at number 2, and then the MCU currently at number 1. So it's pretty successful. It's been especially like an interesting generational thing. I know, like, with this and Doctor Who, they're both like franchises that people always say, like, oh, this is my particular Bond. This is my particular thing that I jumped into the series on. Kaycee, who was that for you, and is that person also your favorite Bond?
It is, and it is still probably to me, still Roger Moore. What it was my best friend growing up spent a year in Scotland and came back with knowledge of what James Bond and Monty Python were. As a result, every boy in that 5th grade class was quoting James Bond and Monty Python. But he sat me down and he had, I think it was The Man with the Golden Gun was the first one he showed me, because we were also big Star Wars fans. And he was like, oh, this is Count Dooku. And I expected him to look like Count Dooku and not super young 70s Christopher Lee. Then I borrowed a few of the tapes that he got in Europe from him, and I watched Goldfinger on VHS. I watched Die Another Day, and slowly I stopped watching the ones that he gave me and started seeking them out on my own. That was around the time I realized AMC would do Bond marathons all the flipping time. like if they weren't doing one, Spike TV was doing one. So I just gradually watched pretty much all of them, except oddly enough, one that we're going to be covering tonight that I only watched half of at that age.
Oh, interesting. We'll talk all about both these particular films specifically. But Adam, what about you? Who was your Bond? Who made you sort of jump into it? And sort of what is James Bond to you? Where do you think that kind of character works the best in terms of his long history?
First Bond I saw was Sean Connery. My dad is a huge Sean Connery fan, and especially of the Sean Connery Bonds. So that was easily the first ones I saw. I want to say the first one I saw was Goldfinger, and then it kind of just kept going from there. Bond to me really represents sort of the staying power of really, not necessarily, how do I put this, non-nerdy fandom. Where it's kept alive by the fans, but not in a typical way like people would think about Star Wars fans or Star Trek fans or things like that. Like you said, it's kind of cool, man, that something that's run as long as it has, and everybody knows what it is, and everybody does have a particular favorite for different reasons. It's just Bond has kind of always been there my whole life. It apparently, probably always will be. So it's just kind of comforting anytime a James Bond movie comes on or comes out. You're like, this old hat. And it's really sort of it's special in that way.
Yeah, I have an interesting history with Bond where I've talked many times about how my dad introduced me to a lot of different like things I love about movies. But Bond was always sort of the one that I always attributed to be more of his thing. Because keep in mind, like before I ever saw any Bond movie, I saw like all the spoofs. Like I knew Austin Powers like front and back before I ever saw like one frame of an actual James Bond movie, or any of the different parodies that would come out, like The Simpsons with like the Hank Scorpio episode, which is one of the best episodes of that show, where they would just directly parody. Like I was aware of Bond as like a thing, but I never really watched a Bond movie until I distinctly remember we went to a beach house one summer, and it was unfortunately on a day that it rained all day. So we were like, oh, what do we do? Well, this place has a VHS, and the only VHS they had was the Bond film The World Is Not Enough, the Pierce Brosnan classic that I watched, and I was just like, after hearing so long my dad talking about how much he loved James Bond, I was just like, is this what you're fucking talking about? This is dumb and stupid. I fucking hate this. This is bad. I'm not bothering with these movies, which happened for a while until 2006 came along, and Casino Royale was the big talk, especially amongst even kids I knew, were just like, oh, it was such a big thing. And I remember seeing it because I couldn't get into Borat because I was a kid. And I was just like, oh man, I'm missing out on Borat. How do I get my wife jokes? How will I get that? So I was just like, fine, I'll see the dumb Bond movie. And that blew me right out of my fucking chair. It was such a phenomenon. Like, oh my god, this is great. This feels like it's like a really sleek, modern, but emotionally driven like action movie. This is so dope. I'm so on board with this. So it was around the time of, I would say, the 50th anniversary when Skyfall came out. I really dug into like all of the Bonds. Like I went through, and this was, keep in mind, while I was around in like college at this point. And what I find so interesting about Bond is just you can track sort of the history of popular culture through every single Bond, for better and for worse. It's interesting, especially where like the Connery era was a lot more about like kind of setting trends. And then by the time you get to the Moore era, it's more of just like, let's keep up with trends. And that never quite stops. Some end up still making great movies despite that. And then some try and catch up with Star Wars and make Moonraker. So it can go either way. And I think that's what makes even the worst Bonds fascinating. Would you maybe agree with that, Kaycee, as a fan?
Very much so. Like when it came to coming up with ones I would recommend avoiding, I was still having trouble coming up with something where I could not recommend in any way, shape, or form. Like Peak Behind Career, my least favorite Bond movie is Die Another Day. I still think there are some very fascinating things about that movie, even though it's a train wreck of a movie. Same with The World Is Not Enough. Like you're talking about how dumb it was. I agree that one movie is blah as fuck, but I still really like Robert Carlyle in that movie, and I'm blanking on her name, but she played Electra King. And the fact that that movie has two villains that kind of like balance it out. And also Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist.
That's also there, and Christmas came early that year.
No, I thought Christmas only came once a year.
Oh, once a year, that's true. I'm sorry, I forgot that great line. that Oscar Wilde witty line that everyone loves. But yeah, so there's definitely a wide swath of different Bond experiences on this particular episode, and we're covering two very interesting films in the franchise that we chose at the end of our last episode. I had the two good picks that we picked randomly at the end of the last episode. Adam had the two bad ones, and our good pick is not one starring one of the more popular or prolific Bonds, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And then the bad pick that we have is Never Say Never Again, which is technically a James Bond movie as much as it legally can be, as we will explain. So two very interesting entries in the franchise in general. So let's go ahead and get started with On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
An avalanche of action. Bigger, better, different. It's got to be when he's around.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
The new Bond.
Suppose I were to kill you for a thrill.
The different 007. George Lazenby. The different Bond from the same stable.
So On Her Majesty's Secret Service came out December 18th, 1969, and is the sixth Bond film, following the big Connery run that started with Dr. No, ended with You Only Live Twice. And this one was kind of infamous at the time, because it is the first time that Bond was recast after Connery left the first time, following You Only Live Twice. And so they searched for a new guy, and they found him in the form of a Mr. George Lazenby, who before this was mostly like a male model and had been in some like TV advertisements. And this was still decided to be like, okay, we're going to get him to be in this movie and potentially be a recurring Bond, though this would be his only adventure as Mr. Bond. And it was directed by Peter Hunt, who had been like an editor and second unit director on a lot of the movies prior to this, and was not as successful as the other Bonds. It made $82 million at the time, but that was perceived to be the lowest grossing one at that point, and was sort of seen as like a disastrous one-off. They got Sean Connery back for Diamonds Are Forever right after this, and it was kind of brushed off to the side for a while. But with time, On Her Majesty's Secret Service has aged like a fine wine in the eyes of many a Bond fan. And Kaycee, I believe you're one of those people.
I am. I was always kind of into this movie because it's different, but different in a way that really works for me. And as time has gone on, it has gone from going, oh, I actually kind of like that one, to fuck yeah, I think this is my favorite one of the franchise. I don't love George Lazenby. He's my least favorite Bond, but I still think he does a pretty good job. But Diana Rigg is far and away my favorite Bond girl, to a point where it's not even particularly close. I think Telly Savalas is the best Blofeld. I love the setting. I love the set pieces. I was so happy when I saw that this was going to be the movie we were covering.
Yeah, I knew you were a fan, so I was definitely curious. And it's one I think that is worth defending. Adam, what about you? What do you think, basically, of On Her Majesty's Secret Service?
It's, if not it's top 5 James Bond, for sure. I can't agree enough that Diana Rigg is inarguably the best Bond girl on screen. She's capable, she's tough, she's beautiful, she's perfect. And Telly Savalas is not necessarily, I don't know if he's my favorite Blofeld. If he's not, he's neck and neck for number 1 with Pleasance. I just think Pleasance plays it so terrifying, but Savalas has such charm to him. But yeah, I think this movie's great, dude. I love the theme, the Louis Armstrong theme, where there's no fucking lyrics. This is the best novel is for James Bond. I think pretty much universally thought that. And it's filled with great characters. I love the way it ends. I love everything about it. And Lazenby, no, he is probably the worst Bond, but not by a lot. I mean, he's still perfectly capable in this, in my opinion. He's just, he's new. But yeah, this movie's damn near a masterpiece as far as James Bond goes.
Yeah, a bit of a correction that there is the Louis Armstrong song, We Have All the Time in the World, which does have lyrics, but then there's the main theme composed by John Barry that does not, that plays over the opening credits. So, before you all write in about somebody getting fired for that blunder.
Yeah, right.
And I can say why it doesn't have any lyrics. It's because he said, how the fuck do you make a song with a chorus on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Fair point. Very weird, awkward title to turn into a song, especially. I think I avoided this for so long because it was sort of like the black sheep, because it had that reputation. It's like, oh, George Lazenby, whoever the hell this is. I'll say that, like, with Lazenby, especially revisiting this time, I don't think he necessarily fits as well in the more traditional Bond, like, set pieces, maybe? Because you can see they rely a lot more on the stunt guys in those sequences and not showing his face as much. But I think what makes him so interesting in this is he has a lot more vulnerability in a way that, like, I don't think Connery would have been able to portray at this point in his career. I think if he had, done this particular movie, I don't think he would have quite worked at, like, really being honest and vulnerable with Diana Rigg as much as Lazenby is. Because Lazenby has a bit more of, like, this boyish charm that I think at the same time makes him more perceptible to, like, the way Bond's a bit more rash in this movie. It's a weird thing where he has, like, the height angle, because he's literally, like, 6'2". I think isn't he the tallest Bond?
I want to say Roger Moore is taller, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain he's the tallest.
Right, but he's this big lumbering guy who like has like this great interesting like athleticism to him, but at the same time his best moments in this movie really aren't those as much as like him being able to be like either honest with her, or even when I love him being dressed up as like the college like professor guy when he goes to fucking Blofeld's hideout. He's like so he's like, oh Christ, yes, I'm going to be investigating your lineage. It's such a like funny bit to a point where like I wouldn't have minded seeing Lazenby continue in this role in particular, like kind of carry on that vulnerability in a world where the Tracy Bond sort of tragedy kind of like actually carry through a bit further than it did in other movies where they reference some things, but they never really. It's a weird thing where it's one of the few continuity things, but it's also kind of like put under the rug at this as many times as it is actually referenced elsewhere.
I believe at one point, and this might be just a random thing I read on IMDb that got deleted later that week. I believe at one point Diamonds Are Forever was supposed to be a lot more about him getting back at her, but because of both the mixed reception to this and the fact that they didn't necessarily want to make the movie as heavy as they did, and indeed Diamonds Are Forever is a lot of things, but is not a heavy movie, they pretty much just decided, okay, we will make that just the cold open, and then from there it can just be another Bond adventure.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, I miss this kind of vulnerability in Bonds. Like, I think Daniel Craig definitely carried that a lot more, especially in Casino Royale, owes a lot of debts to this particular movie. But I don't think, unfortunately, like, after this point, just really dropping that for, like, the Moore era, which isn't my favorite era of Bond. It's a lot more silly, and I don't think has as interesting, like, emotional honesty that I think this particular movie has. And I think that's so fascinating for especially a guy who was always put up as just like, oh, I'm masculine man who, especially in the Connery era, had committed a lot of like, sexist and worse things to like his Bond girls at various different points. I like the fact that this movie has a few instances of that like earlier on, like particularly when Tracy shows up in his hotel room, but after that point where like he slaps her once and then he completely lets his guard down, especially at that particular point, he doesn't actually take her, she takes him and leaves him in the hotel room, which I love that twist on. It immediately just sets up like, Tracy isn't your regular Bond girl. She has complete independence and fierceness. She's not a Bond girl, she's a Bond woman.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's why I think she's the strongest of all of the Bond, in quotes, girls. It's just she's her complete own sort of self-reliant character that is completely capable of sort of flipping the script on the James Bond archetype and things like that. Like she's in control of her own sort of emotions, her own body and everything. She's not just where, she meets James Bond and turns to, a puddle when he's around. Like she knows what she's doing. She's playing her hand and playing it well. And it's just such a wonderful performance from Diana Rigg as well. She's sexy, she's beautiful, but at the same time, she's just got such an air of confidence about her and a toughness and also a fragility that you don't see in really most of the Bond girls roles up to this point, and I'd argue very few since.
My favorite shot in probably any Bond movie is after he escapes this, which I also love the escape in this. He's at the ice rink. He thinks he's about to get recaptured, and someone skates up to him, and you just see ankles in some skate shoes, and he just pans up, and it's going up Diana Rigg, and she looks down at him. And at that moment, I buy 100% why Bond would want to marry her. Like, she is the one who's going to be able to get him out of this. And with everything you've seen leading up to that, my God, I'm sorry, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it right now in a way that I don't think the franchise ever gives me again.
Well, especially with like the music underneath being like that one Christmas song, and the kids are saying like "He needs love" right as her face pops up is like a great like little detail in there. But I also like the fact that like they're able to do that despite the fact that like in the middle of this, like because Tracy disappears after like between their big love montage and that sequence you're referring to, she disappears, and Bond does have his way with a couple women who are totally into him at the ski chalet place.
I was gonna say a couple. He basically bangs all of Blofeld's harem.
Right,
Like,
right.
He just doesn't give a shit.
Right.
Wow.
But and I was worried revisiting this, just like, oh, is this going to make the stuff later feel insincere? It's like, no, this is like his last bout as like traditional James Bond, because he realizes after that point, like, oh, I'm not too different from like Blofeld, like completely manipulating these women after a certain point. And then when he ends up getting back to Tracy, just like, no, this is like someone who actually has her own independence to her, who I love at the same time. Like, this is somebody who I should be with. I shouldn't be this philanderer anymore. That was like his last sort of attempt at being the traditional Bond. And then him finally like realizing it's like, no, there was something great under my nose this whole time. Why would I ever do this again?
It's just so good, guys.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. No, I definitely agree. Not exactly what it is, but it feels like it's almost his ceremonious, like, bachelor party in Vegas where there's no rules before he settles down and gets married. Like, it's his last hurrah. 100%. And 100% you believe that Diana Rigg would be the one to sort of bring James Bond down a peg. Like, it totally makes sense. One thing I do want to bring up too, like, yes, Blofeld, great. But also, in a lot of Bond movies, you get sort of the side villains and sort of the henchmen and all that. In most Bond movies, you got Oddjob, you got, Jaws, all of them. Dude, Draco and Irma are really strong sort of side villains in this. They're really, really good.
Irma's fucking underrated when it comes to henchmen. Like,
Incredibly underrated.
Yeah, she never gets brought up, but she is simultaneously both a brains and a brawn in that she's the one who kills Tracy, actually. Like, I'm a little let down she doesn't show up again.
Yeah, I think particularly like the way that she kind of carries herself around all the people in Blofeld's little harem, just like pouring them around, just like, oh no, we can't do this, we can't do that. She has this like term taskmaster type mentality that really works, and especially when like things go awry, it really works. Or even with the Draco character, I love the bit where Bond's like number 2 tries to go on the ski chalet, and it's just like, it's been closed for 2 weeks, nobody can come, and just amazing, like locks the door and shit. Just like, damn, this is the most intimidating way somebody could be like, no, this is off limits, no ride for you, go ski over there.
It is really well directed by Peter Hunt. It's really, really well done. And I didn't realize it, but rewatching this, I'm like, oh, Inception, oh,
yep,
Tenet, oh, Christopher Nolan. Like, there's a lot in here, man. And so I did a little research. Turns out, yeah, he is a huge fan of this movie. And I totally get why. And it's shot so well, and the action beats are great. I don't understand. I guess it's got to be the Lazenby thing. That's the only reason I can think of why this movie is, like, sort of looked down upon. Like, in hindsight, it has to just be the Lazenby thing. I mean, what else could it possibly be?
I think that's why people outright dismiss it. It's just that Lazenby doesn't really like enter the canon. He's always kind of like skipped over, especially with like being bored between 2 Connery movies doesn't really help that. By the way, slight digression that we slightly got something wrong. Draco is not actually the henchman that we're referring to. That's Grunther, I believe, is that henchman, because Draco is Tracy's father. The Gabriel Ferretti character. Oh, right.
Sorry. You're right. You're right.
Just a shout out, though. I love the relationship that he has with, like, both Bond and Tracy, where, like, Tracy is sort of, like, the troublemaker daughter who he, like, constantly tries to, like, oh, I need to quell her somehow. You, a man, you can do that. You can quell my, like, abrasive daughter or whatever. And then ultimately, like, how we see that Tracy and him do not have a good relationship. Like the bit where it's just like, Daddy, tell him the thing that you were going to say, or I'm never going to see you again. I'll completely disappear from your life. Just, it's so cold the way Diana Rigg delivers it. But at the same time, their relationship eventually becomes a lot more close. There is a bit more of just like, is there anything about like him loving you the way that you love him? Just like, well, in time, there might be something like that. I love those little bits back and forth with them. It's this interesting thing where he's trying to keep the Bond status quo going by just like, you can tame my daughter, basically. I'll give you $1 million dowry for this. And then it just eventually how that completely melts away, and Bond's even just like, I'm not taking that money. I love this woman. I don't need that money to be happy with her.
Another thing in this movie is a very tiny thing that always gives me a little bit of goosebumps, but it's in that scene where she's like, that may come too, and he says, no, I'll talk with him tomorrow. And she goes, no, whatever happens, there will be no regrets. I'm like, oh.
Oh god, this movie does such a brilliant job of like foreshadowing the tragedy, which we'll go into a lot more by the end of this discussion, but just some other things. One, talk about Blofeld again. I love Telly Savalas' Blofeld. I agree. I think he is my favorite because, no offense to Pleasance, who I think does a great job portraying like the iconic version of Blofeld. The thing is, his Blofeld's definitely just more of like the typical Bond villain sitting off in a chair distantly, not really doing anything, like his henchmen do the work. Fucking Telly Savalas' Blofeld gets his hands dirty. Like, he is going along with that awesome ski chase, which I love. Probably my favorite action sequence in this whole movie. It's just that giant ski chase that's going on where Bond, like, ends up losing one of his skis and everything. And Telly Savalas is so determined, like, I am gonna shoot this motherfucker dead. Or even later on, when they're chasing against him and Tracy, and the fucking avalanche she causes, like, he uses Mother Nature to fucking kill Bond. Just like, damn, that dude doesn't give a fuck.
They only skipped over Pleasance because they were like, oh, Pleasance isn't really very much of a physical actor. They wanted someone who can do action scenes. Telly Savalas did war movies.
Yeah, Kojak's fucking unhinged in this movie, man. He just has such a different air about him that really any other Bond villains, and really, obviously, any other Blofeld. He's, it helps that, he's not British, he's an American. And his accent and sort of the swagger he keeps with him and everything. It's unlike any other Bond villain. And yet, again, it sort of gets downgraded a lot. Like a lot of people, like he's not considered the worst. That's, well, I would say Christoph Waltz, but I can't remember.
Charles Gray?
Yeah.
No Nick from Rocky Horror Picture Show, yes.
Yeah. Well, but I think Telly Savalas is fucking solid in this movie. And you're right, Thomas. Like, he's like, I'm just going to do it my fucking self then. And it's really cool to see sort of, the archetypical Bond sort of master of this shadow organization actually getting dirty and getting in the mud and getting his hands sort of bloody at the same time as his, sort of henchman. It's really cool. And again, I don't think you've really seen it since.
Well, at the same time, what I like about it is that he has that kind of, like, burly tenacity, but also when he is, like, sitting around doing the traditional, like, Bond exposition stuff, like, monologuing to Bond, or later on when he's got, like, Tracy captured, he has that same kind of swagger that works for a Bond villain. I love particularly, like, him and Tracy going off each other, which is like, I can make you a countess, but I'm already a countess. Just completely shrugging off any of his advances, just, like, so fucking good. All that stuff is so great, and leads to also Tracy being capable as a Bond girl, where she's actually, like, fighting, and doing a pretty damn good job of, like, hitting his henchmen. Particularly the bit where, like, she gets that fucking bottle and, like, cracks it and has, like, the jagged edges right in that dude's face. Like, Tracy don't fuck around either.
What I especially love is that final thing that he's ransoming for, his end goal isn't, like, hundreds of millions of dollars or a country or anything like that. He's saying, hey, give me fucking amnesty. I did a lot of shit. I kind of want to retire now, though. So I'll tell you what, you let me retire, I won't cause COVID.
Right? It's rewatching it, that was wild. Yeah, because he literally just like, oh, causing an epidemic. You're just like, oh, right. What I also like is that it's kind of like a recurring thing throughout this movie is that kind of like wanting to hang things up and wanting to kind of retire. Like, that's a thing, obviously, with Blofeld, but also even Bond's relationship with MI6 is a lot more of just like, this tenacity, especially, like, I think this is my favorite use of the other Bond adjacent characters, like, particularly Bernard Lee as M, where he's just like, I'm fucking tired of your bullshit, dude. Like, you're just going around gallivanting being fucking James Bond. You're causing me so many fucking headaches, and I'm tired of it. Like, particularly when the resignation he puts in, it's just like, oh, can you come over to my office? Thanks. Accepted. Get the fuck out of here. Just like, damn. He is not taking your shit anymore, dude.
It's very corny, but I really love the scene where he's emptying out his desk and it's just things from other movies.
Yes, and even like he looks at the picture of the queen, just like, oh, sorry, mom, and drinks the rest of the flask. It's so good. I think this movie has such an interesting kind of weird finality to it that makes me think like feels definitely like the end of Bond's relevance as sort of like the one making the trends, like I kind of referenced earlier. Like the end of the 60s kind of feels like it's a movie acknowledging kind of like the Bond golden era is probably ending at this point. We don't know what happens next, but this feels like it's Bond saying goodbye to his kind of like huge dominance as the biggest action progenitor, which is also weird given there's so many good action sequences we haven't really talked about, like everything with like Bond escaping from like that one room with all the gears over to the ski chalet, or like I mentioned, like the whole skiing thing is dope. What is everybody's favorite action sequence in this, Kaycee?
It is the ski sequence. I know I've said it gives me goosebumps several times, but the third thing in this movie that also just gives me goosebumps is when the main opening credits theme starts playing as he's escaping and you just see all the guys in orange jumpsuits skiing out. I just get so into it at that moment, and I just love watching that bit all the way like right up through him being found by a Diana rig.
Yeah, especially shout out to like that whole stunt team. The way that they were like jumping around places. Like the only times it doesn't work is like clearly like very much of its time kind of like shots of them like with the rear screen projection, which I think only really hurts for like say a Lazenby, who I don't think is just used to it because he hadn't acted before, versus like when Savalas, like you get the head-on shot, just like, oh, he's so pissed off. He's like his teeth are grating at you. But Adam, what's your favorite action sequence here?
I mean, absolutely agree. It's the ski sequence. It's so iconic, and it's been emulated and sort of paid tribute to in several different films and even television shows. It's so good. It's so tight. Great stunt team. And yes, when the theme starts to play during the escape, me too. I'm like, oh yeah, fuck yeah. Like it's great. It's so tight and just well done.
Well, just to shout out a couple other little bits. One, I really like the siege at the end of the Blofeld compound, especially like him chasing after Blofeld, or even like when Bond enters and he's like fucking flying down the fucking like icy ramp with like the gun directly in his face, just like shooting down, and him, like I said, chasing Blofeld around and getting to eventually the big bobsled chase. I love that bobsled chase so much, where there's so much of this like tension, and you really feel, especially when Bond like jumps out of it and then has to like run around and like jump onto Blofeld's thing, and when Blofeld's like fucking putting his head so close to the icy side, just like, oh fuck, like, there's so much tension that I don't really get out of like a lot of Bond like action sequences, particularly later on. Because of like the whole thematics of this feeling like Bond wanting to retire, there's so much more tension in any of these action scenes. We're just like, is this like the last one? What the fuck are they gonna do? It's like, wow. It's just like, it's so stunning that like, especially this movie gets so cast aside despite having so many of like the great action sequences and character beats and so much awesome stuff. I agree that like, if you did not watch this movie because just like, oh, is that Sean Connery, one of the big ones? Get over yourself. Watch this movie. It's so great.
Let's say this wasn't the first time that they had swapped out Bond. Let's say that George Lazenby was the third person coming in with it, and people were already used to the idea that James Bond doesn't need to just be this one guy. I don't think that anyone would have had a problem with it. This would have been the cool start to a new Bond, the way Goldeneye is, or the way Casino Royale is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why this got so much more reconsideration post Moore and Dalton and Brosnan, like, being a thing. I think that's why, like, people are able to appreciate it, because it's like, oh, Bond isn't just Connery, and it can have different flavors, even though this one still works within that Connery era for all the reasons we're talking about, though it does take the biggest risk, which we should talk about here. This is the movie where Bond marries Tracy at the very end after a wonderful also scene in the barn where they like basically he proposes to her off the cuff. I also love how that sequence goes. But there's the big wedding scene, which I think is really tremendous. I love the uses of like Q and M there, or even Lois Maxwell when she's saying goodbye to fucking Bond at that point. They're like cute back and forth they've had for years. Just like is crystallized so perfectly in that ending where she just realizes like, you're gone, you're the man who I wanted and you're just gone. He like throws her the top hat and she has like these tears in her eyes. It's so beautiful. I love that moment a lot.
Yeah, well, what I appreciate about that one is like in the Connery era, it was kind of a mutual flirtation, but you don't really get a sense in, especially in like From Russia with Love or something like that around there, that she's actually expecting that they're going to get together or even maybe thinking it. It's almost like, here's the cute guy at work, the, as Superstar called it once, the work flirt for me. And that's it for her. And that's like kind of mutual for them. And then at this moment right here is the first time the franchise is saying maybe this wasn't all that was to her. And it almost like puts Moneypenny in kind of a sadder light. Maybe this wasn't just work flirt. Maybe this is someone she really wanted. That's really how they played Moneypenny from here on out until arguably the Daniel Craig era, where she's much more like, no, I see what you're doing. I don't really like being on the field. I shot you once. We're good.
Yeah, to be fair, I think they hit their apex with that, with which is the Bond that has like one of the last scenes where Brosnan won, and their version of Moneypenny like has a virtual reality simulation where she fucks
Die
Bond.
Another Day. That's Die Another Day.
Yep, terrible. One of the worst things I've ever seen, that particular bit. It's like so
Don't like that.
cringy.
You don't like that bit where she enters the Matrix?
Nope, I don't. I'm not a big fan of that. But anyway. So back when on Her Majesty's Secret Service, like, you know, Bond rejects the dowry and he's off with Tracy, and it's this beautiful sort of like moment where it's this weird version of like the ending of any Bond movie where like, oh, we're off secluded, I'm with my lover, and we're about to like close the blinds so we can make love again in the middle of this like escape pod or whatever the fuck. But this is like, oh, we're two people genuinely in love and we want to spend the rest of our lives together. And then fucking Blofeld drives that fucking car, and Irma has the gun and shoots, and we think, oh, they just shot at the car and there's gonna be a big chase sequence. Tracy's fucking dead in that car. And it's one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a major awesome action movie. Just after all this like great awesome escapist entertainment, it ends on this really tragic, genuinely affecting note, and gives Lazenby his best performance bit of just saying like, oh, she just needs a rest. Don't worry, we have all the time in the world. It's so fucking good, and it makes me cry every time.
Mm-hmm. And then the score kicks right back in.
Yep, I have such a problem with that. We're just like, oh, this sweet, sad like version of the we have all the time in the world, then ba-da-ba-da, diamonds are forever.
I'm okay with it because, and I know it's just the same recording, but going off of the We Have All the Time in the World to that music cue, it feels oddly more chaotic and more angry than it has ever had before. Had Diamonds Are Forever essentially been proto License to Kill, where it's just Bond on a vendetta spree, I think that music sting would have worked a lot better as a here's what's you're in for next.
Perhaps. But Adam, how do you feel about that crushing blow of an ending?
I mean, it's exactly what that is. I mean, it is a crushing blow, and it shows sort of a vulnerability to Bond that, you know, we don't see quite a bit. And I love the fact that, you know, he cries, you know, and I know that was a big thing that during the production, they're like, you know, James Bond doesn't cry and all this stuff, but he did it anyways. And it totally solidifies that sort of this ultra male sort of, you know, chauvinist character has been taken down a notch, and he's just a vulnerable man now. Like, he's just a normal, vulnerable guy who is loved and ultimately horribly lost. It is a downer of an ending, but it's also a perfect ending, and to the point to where I wish we could have seen where this version of Bond would have went. And like we said earlier, and I really hate that they negated it. Although then when you get Casino Royale, they spend 3 movies, you know, explaining how hurt he is because of Vesper. So it's like, I really love the ending of this movie.
The whole Daniel Craig thing is a completely different discussion, but I think at the same time, with what I love about this particular ending is that it just has this note of finality in a way that you could almost just like never watch another Bond movie after this. You could just stop here. You'd still be losing out on a lot of great movies that followed afterward, but at the same, it feels like it is like sort of the great ending note for this particular character to go out on, even with like Casino Royale, which I love what they do with the Vesper Lynd character and their whole dynamic back and forth. At the same time, that is a bit more trying to use it as like a way to explain like how Bond became the Bond that we would know later, as opposed to this is the Bond that we know, ultimately coming to a horribly sad conclusion about just like, no matter what you think, you've spent this whole movie trying to get away from this life that you've had for so long, and unfortunately that life comes back. That life, you don't immediately just like get to go off into the sunset after being a super spy that has like toppled governments and destroyed like giant fucking volcano layers and all this other shit. You don't get to have that happy ending, unfortunately. So you're basically doomed to continue the Bond series. Honestly, you could interpret like any Bond movie after this in this sort of weird continuity from here to like the end of Brosnan. It's just like a sad, endless hell that Bond has to go through. You know, where he also like faces off against blaxploitation guys and the villain blows up like a balloon, or he dresses up as a clown and hides an alligator mask, or Die Another Day happens. You know, just all this silly stuff. There's still this weird tragedy overlaying it, just like, well, he had Tracy, and it just completely dissipated.
I'm now just picturing like it's a almost like Good Place style. Like this is his weird fucked up afterlife is just Diamonds Are Forever through Die Another Day. Just saying, maybe this will be this will be it. Oh no, Sean Bean is back. I fought off warlords and generals, and now Jonathan Pryce has a news channel.
Just inside, he's just like, let me die. I can't keep living this life anymore. Oh, but we're getting pretty far away from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which we've talked about quite a lot, and we do have another movie we have to talk about. But let's just do some quick final thoughts then on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Kaycee, go ahead. It's your favorite Bond movie. Do you have anything else to add beyond that?
I think I said my case. I love that it's one of the few Bond movies where Bond actually has an arc of himself and character development, but usually when that happens, there's also a struggle with the villains or side characters not being as interesting. They are all interesting all the way through this. I love all the henchmen. I love the plan. I love the music. I love the art decoration. I love the style. I love Diana Rigg so much. I love Telly Savalas so much. I love that this is not like just going for gritty. It still can be silly, but in very fun ways. It's terrifically exciting, even though until very recently this was the longest Bond movie. It does not feel it in the slightest. You can tell that the director had been an editor. I love that this is the movie I got to talk about. On Her Majesty's Secret Service for life, bro.
Great. Just a great final note to end that there. Adam, your final thoughts on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
I mean, it's fucking dope, dude. You know, unfortunately, it's one of the most underappreciated and underseen of the James Bond sort of catalog, and I think that's really a shame because this deserves to be talked about amongst the best of them. It's a super solid fucking movie. It's populated by great, rich characters, villains, Bond girls, Bond himself. It treats Bond in a way that has not been seen up until this point, and it's kind of refreshing for that. It kind of makes you want for what could have come afterwards, but the fact that you even just get this is enough. It's just a really, really solid, not only James Bond movie, but just a spy movie, action movie, thriller movie, drama movie, however you want to classify it. It kind of hits all those beats, and it works, you know, at the top level on all of them. It's just incredibly enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that's been said, and also would just second that, like, it's this great example of, like, it's a movie that has so much of this, like, emotional impact and so many, like, great, like, moments of actually, like, evolving Bond and all these other, like, great side characters in this new direction that is so, like, unique to the series at this particular point. But also, it's a really fun action movie. Like, there's especially a lot of, like, hand-to-hand combat scenes where they do, like, the fast motion thing that I'm not as huge a fan of in the Connery era. And here, it just feels like it's this weird version of, like, oh, this Bond is, like, this massive, huge lumbering guy who is so quick that, like, he'll hit you in the face and you won't even know what fucking happened. It's a great way of evolving that style of Bond in a way that, I agree, I wish had happened, especially into the 70s, where I think it kind of hits a doldrum point, despite some pretty solid movies in there. I would still say, yeah, this is definitely in a top 5. There's a few others I would say I prefer a bit more. We might talk about some of those when we get to our double reduce section in a bit. But yeah, it's a tremendous movie that I would still say deserves so much more than its reputation. But before we get to the next film, here is a promo for an ESO you can queue up right after ours.
Do you like podcasts?
Then you're gonna hate Thunder Talk.
Tasteless subject matter.
Mature humor. Contempt for our co-hosts.
Unapologetic social views.
Edgy music.
And total irreverence for the nerd junk we love.
Are all reasons why no one
should listen to Thunder Talk.
Find us on the ESO network.
And all podcasting platforms. Or don't.
Whatever.
And now let's get into Never Say Never Again.
Sean Connery is James Bond, Agent 007.
My name's Bond.
Oh, you're Mr. Bond. I believe I'm having you in half an hour.
Oh, splendid. Your room or mine?
You're marvelously well equipped.
Thank you, James. So are you.
Good to see you, Mr. Bond. Things have been awfully dull round here. I hope we're going to have some gratuitous sex and violence.
I certainly hope so, too.
Sean Connery is Ian Fleming's James Bond in Never Say Never Again.
So Never Say Never Again is an interesting beast because it's one of the two unofficial non-Eon, which is the production company that made most of the Bond movies, along with a different one we'll also, I think, talk about in a bit with our Double Redo section. The huge issue with this is it's a remake of the film Thunderball that Connery originally did, and Connery is here again, only that movie was made in 1965 and this is 1983, because there was a huge legal controversy with this producer, Kevin McClory. Kevin McClory basically had worked with Ian Fleming on a screenplay that never got made, where they invented a lot of the concepts of Spectre and Blofeld and all this stuff, and then he made the novel Thunderball, which had a lot of those recurring elements, so he ended up suing Ian Fleming for a lot of money, until they eventually agreed, okay, as a settlement, you can be the only main producer on Thunderball, and you'll also be able to produce your own version of Thunderball 10 years after this. And he was like, okay, sure, I'll take that. So Thunderball happens, and then from the mid-70s until 1983, he was in production on Never Say Never Again. And this lawsuit that we're referring to is also the main reason why you didn't see Spectre and Blofeld again from this point until the recent 2015 film, Spectre. And that's kind of a bummer, especially considering, despite how much he legally fought to have that sort of used in this movie, Spectre's a non-entity in this fucking movie.
I like that you said low budget. The metaphor I've been using is this feels like an Italian knockoff of a famous movie, like an unlicensed Italian sequel. In fairness, it's better shot and edited than most of those, but there's something that almost copyright infringement feeling about this. It's odd.
Well, yeah, especially because they can use Sean Connery and they can use a couple of the characters, but they can't use any of the other cast members, and also they can't use any of the big iconic things like the Bond theme or the fucking gun barrel. You would figure that would be a reason for you could actually just do something entirely different. You can make an interesting different Bond film, but instead they just went for what you're talking about, which is a weird Italian knockoff, or even the way I describe this movie is it's like a canon movie without the fun wackiness. It's just sapped of life, but has that same low production value. Despite also, by the way, $36 million budget, $10 million more than Octopussy, the Eon movie that came out around the same year, which is baffling.
A Star Wars A New Hope's budget differed between this and Octopussy. The thing is, Octopussy, not a great movie. Among the worst. But even then, bad production values still looks better than this. This is... even besides, I said, Irvin Kershner, notedly good director and pretty good at moving cameras, pretty good at editing. But it seems like he really slumped on this. There's a lot of shots that are just very boring to look at. The opening shot of this movie, you see the 007 fade in, and then it's just looks like the opening shot of Suicide Squad, just an ugly shot of a bayou.
Yes, but Adam, this was your choice. And are you happy with your life decisions?
I mean, no, but yes, in the fact that I honestly feel that I picked the worst James Bond movie. And for a lot of the reasons you said, Thomas, you fuck, I actually took notes, and a lot of it that I said was knowing that there's not going to be a sequel, knowing that there's not going to be a follow-up to this version of Bond, they could have just not been so beholden to, sort of the albatross that is the Bond franchise and done something great. It could have been a Bond out of time movie. It could have been how the Cold War came about because of stuff like people like a James Bond and things and how they affected it and all that stuff. There could have been so much cool stuff. Really play more into that. He's aging now and he's almost like a man out of time and all this stuff. But no, they just gave you a really shitty pale imitation of a James Bond movie. And the opening not even to get into the 007 logo, which is so dumb and such a cheap sort of attempt to give you a new version of the gun barrel. But it's this whole generic action bit set to this mellow ass song, and it doesn't work, at all. And the fact of the matter is that that's how they're going to try to bring you into the movie, and there's no care even given to make it that exciting. It's just kind of bland from beginning to end.
Yeah, shout out to Lanny Hall and the composer Michael Legrand, which, for the record, I think he's a really great French jazz.
He's amazing. He's a really good composer. He can do romance and drama and things like that. Clearly, action, not his thing, dude.
No, Umbrellas of Cherbourg doesn't translate to Never Say Never Again. Shockingly.
Yeah, it's just shockingly. But yeah, the whole score feels off. Every bit of it doesn't work. I will say, Sean Connery in overalls might be the best thing I've ever seen. If not the horse jump, might be the second best thing I've ever seen.
Well, that's also the weird thing too, is that it feels so much of it's Connery Bond at this point. He's 52, which, to be fair, is younger than Roger Moore is at this point in Octopus. He's 56, but it's him in the middle of an old story he did, done differently to, one, really relate to the trends of the time, and also especially to kind of emulate a lot of the stylistic stuff of a Roger Moore movie, in a way where just this is a disastrous mishmash that never gels whatsoever.
You get the feeling Sean Connery, yeah, he's there because he got a $3 million paycheck or whatever, but he doesn't even give a fuck, dude. And especially when you compare it to Thunderball, which is not necessarily a great James Bond movie, but it's a solid one. Even certain character beats they take in that one, when Thunderball, where he tells Domino, your brother's dead, it's this really kind of emotional scene, and he's really sort of doesn't want to tell her, and there's a part with the watch and all that stuff.
Yes.
It's really kind of heartfelt. And this is just this big stupid dance scene. By the way, your brother's dead. Don't say anything. What the fuck? This is what we give him? They kill him by throwing a boa constrictor in his car? Get the fuck out of here with this. It's so stupid. And not to mention what they did with the Fatima character, where in Thunderball, she's almost like a counter to James Bond, where she's perfectly capable. She's a badass. And this, she's a psychopath. And that's her big character beat.
Right, yeah.
It's such a bastardized version. We've talked about cash grabs before on the show, where it's clearly they made this just to get money. This is that, 100%.
Yeah, it's literally just we have the rights to do a specific Bond story, and we're going to do it again and get Sean Connery. It feels so cheap and slapdash. Would you say, Kaycee, this is the worst Bond movie as a Bond scholar?
No. It's close. It gets a little bit of points because even though I think this is a very boring movie, it's interesting that it exists. I do appreciate that somehow a almost unlicensed Bond movie that's just a remake of another Bond movie, where its big claim to fame is they got Sean Connery to come back to it. I do think that's interesting, and I totally got why this was a pick, and that it's interesting to talk about, even if the movie itself is very dull and lifeless. But I still think that has more merit to it than, say, Die Another Day.
I suppose it's an interesting curio, I would agree, but just as a movie, the only things I can spot that I kind of are, one, I like most of the fight that he has at the spa with Pat Roach, who's a great big stunt guy who's been he was the guy who fought Indiana Jones several times, in Raiders in particular. He's the guy in front of the airplane. Their back and forth it's a really solid fight throughout that whole spa, until he throws his own piss in Pat Roach's face. Just a weird dumb note for that fucking scene to end on. Two, I will also say, I really like the use of Bernie Casey as Felix Leiter.
Oh, yeah. He stood out to me quite a bit, because for all the talk of who's the best Bond, I honestly find Felix Leiter fascinating in that they just are constantly recasting him. Bernie Casey is probably my favorite outside of David Hedison, who, if you're I'm assuming some of your audience are into sci-fi and horror. David Hedison was the scientist in the original Fly, and he also played him when he had the fly mask on. That was not a stunt guy. And Jeffrey Wright. I think that those two are better, but Bernie Casey is probably third place.
No, especially I like their back and forth where it feels like him and Bond actually know each other, even though Bernie Casey's clearly several years younger than fucking Bond is at this point. Just oh yeah, we're chums, even though it's just you could be my dad's buddy.
In fairness, The Felix Leiter and Goldfinger is probably Bond's dad.
That's true. It's kind of a reverse at that point. That's very true. How would you say this even compares to like a Thunderball to you, Kaycee? Is that one of your favorites, or do you think this is a not that bad remake of that movie, or what?
Thunderball is almost my least favorite of the Connery films. I think it's very good. In fact, I watched it after this, and I liked it a little bit better than the last couple times I watched it. Maybe it was just felt refreshing compared to this, but honestly, even when this movie is doing what's supposed to be doing, it feels like an inferior remake of a Bond movie I don't love. It already is starting in a hole and just never able to get out of that.
Yeah, it does a lot of weird switches, like particularly trading out poker for the fucking video game thing.
Oh, what the fuck? But no, I agree with Kaycee there. It does feel like a remake to a kind of already subpar movie. Like, this almost feels like the Prom Night remake. You know what I mean? Where like it's a terrible movie and they're going to remake it with a terrible movie. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I just don't understand. Well, I do understand. Again, it's money. Like, they knew what they were doing. It's money. But every single character that was in Thunderball to this, none of them transfer well. Even the main star. Like, it's just, nobody gives a fuck. It's so all over the place. And you're telling me, like, dude, look who plays Blofeld in this.
Mr. Max von fucking Sydow, and he's barely in the movie.
And he's barely in it. That could have been the greatest Blofeld ever. It's Max von Sydow, and they do him dirty. Like, who cares? Because they give you fucking Largo. Was anybody threatened by Largo in this movie? Like, he's basically asleep the whole fucking movie. Like, it's just such a muted, comatose performance. Like, and I kind of feel that sets the tone. Well, maybe not. He didn't set the tone, but that's sort of the tone of the whole movie. Like, your hero doesn't give a fuck. Your villain's kind of like, no, I'm here. Like, nobody gives a shit. And this movie's just begging its audience to not give a shit, which I think is ultimately the case. Like, if the people who are making this don't fucking care, why should I?
Yeah, Klaus Brandauer, who plays Largo, I basically the whole time was thinking, this is like if you tried to make a Bond villain out of the third or fourth most important henchman in like a Die Hard movie.
Yeah, right. It's not the guy in Die Hard who comes back to life at the end. It's his fucking brother in the sweatsuit. Like, nobody gives a shit about that guy.
But if you made that guy Hans Gruber.
Exactly. You're like, this fucking sucks. That's 100% what it is.
And I really want to spotlight poor Kim Basinger, who this is very early in her career, but she looks so lost. And I gotta say, like, Connery Bond has had a lot of problems with how he once again treats women in his particular earlier movies, but there's few sequences I find more lecherous than him at the fucking spa where he pretends to be the guy giving her a massage. It's so fucking creepy.
No, it's gross. And the thing is, you said, Connery with his Bond, but, then, the Barbara Walters thing where it's like, oh no, Connery just is a shithole to women. Like, he's a male chauvinist, and you see it all over in this movie. It's terrible. It's terrible. And not only that, because it is sort of classic Bond, real creepy shit that he did to women, especially the Connery Bond. But it's 52-year-old Connery who's like, to however old, 21-year-old Kim Basinger at the time, and there is zero chemistry there. Like, it does just not exist, and it's just unfortunate because, as we all know, she can be a very capable actress. She can also be a terrible actress, but she depends on the material she's given. And unfortunately, this is just terrible.
She looks trapped in a way. I'm just like, I want to get you out of this. Like, this entire movie is like a Bond villain scheme that she's been in the middle of. Just like, I want to get her out of this. This just seems painful.
Yeah, George Lazenby to ski in and grab her.
Fuck yeah.
We'll get you to Gotham City.
That's true. Yes, that's what she needs. That's where she needs to get to. But like, there's also the thing of like you mentioned. Oh, hey, it's like the same kind of Connery thing. This whole movie is this weird kind of like it's not like the good old days kind of thing with Bond. That's like so lazy and dumb. in this fucking movie. How many times it's just like, my former superior here, my predecessor, me M, talking here, was so like kind to your antics, but I don't follow your bullshit. In a way, it's like the worst version of the M that we saw on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Just tired of Bond shit, in more of like, oh, I'm a police detective, like, captain who's tired of your bullshit. You're off the force, Bond. Also, like, I hate the scene with Q as well, where it's just like, oh, you know, Bond days are over. Like, everything's been so different since you've been out of action, Bond. I can't believe it. I hope there's more gratuitous sex and violence this time. Just like, ugh, I hate all of this. It's just turning, like, all the fun things into fucking, like, stupid, like, remember the old days when it was great? No. Fuck off.
And I love, I hope there's more gratuitous sex and violence in this one. Well, yes, I hope so, too.
You know, say what you will about Roger Moore, I don't associate his movies with gratuitous violence.
Or no, either, or horribly chauvinistic sort of sex scenes. Like, Roger Moore was more the, like, kind of light sort of James Bond, and I don't mean light as in like Sean Connery light, but he was more of the suave, debonair spy. He wasn't like the, I'll do whatever it takes to get the job done if that means killing random people or slapping women. Like, no. It's just, this Bond that we get in this movie is a Bond from a bygone era, and you know, it reeks of it the whole movie. It's nobody wants to follow this type of character, man, at this point. I mean, maybe a lot of people did, but I sure as fuck don't.
No, especially at this particular stage where he's so nostalgic about the past in a way it just feels fucking like, sad.
Right. It's like he's like got member berries in his pocket. Like, nobody gives a fuck. like nobody cares.
Hey, you remember when I defeated Dr. No?
Yeah. Remember when I slept with that girl and that she was painted gold? I do.
This Bond thinks if he votes for Brexit, they'll get more gold ladies.
Oh, this Bond 100% voted for Brexit. That's very true.
Oh, yeah.
That's my next letterbox list. Ranking Bonds by which ones voted to leave the EU.
But yeah, even like, I mentioned that like Roger Moore's not my favorite era of Bond, but at least he had his own, like, he was like the gentleman spy. He was like the guy where it's just like, well, you're not as like, you know, rough and tumble as like some other Bonds that I've done around, but like, you're a charming fella I don't mind being around, as opposed to like this scrunting like 50-year-old guy just like, back in my day we did things the right way, as opposed to Roger Moore's just like, oh, you know, this is fine, we can have like a martini here, and then I can go punch somebody, but then we can have like a nice conversation and then have sex. Like, that's a lot more interesting to me than this fucking like asshole who I can't stand. And it's so weird too, where like Connery at this point in his career, we talked about this when we did a Connery episode, is in a weird stage where it's like post Diamonds Are Forever. During the whole like Roger Moore era, he was like in a sort of desperate state of his career, kind of like taking a few major like paychecks and doing stuff like Zardoz, obviously. And then this is definitely him in a weird like midlife crisis point of sorts, where he's just like, no, I can still be cool, I can still be Bond, I can still be great. And I think the best thing to come out of this movie is it kind of humbled him from like being that kind of dude and turned him eventually into the older statesman Connery that, like it or not, at least is more bearable than this fucking movie. Like, imagine if Connery just like kept being this kind of fucking like piece of shit asshole in movies up until his recent passing. It's just like, that would have been so much more like depressing to see.
Oh, if this movie gives me Last Crusade, it's worth it.
Yes, exactly. But you know what? I think it's time we did our final thoughts here on this particular movie. Kaycee, big Bond guy, your final thoughts on Never Say Never Again.
This was the first time I had seen the movie from start to finish within the span of a day, compared to just watching bits and pieces on TV over time. I was going in wondering if this would be the moment where I say, okay, I see the appeal of this is the alt's choice if you were not satisfied with Octopussy. And even then, I think I still prefer Octopussy. It's a bad movie, but I think that there's some interesting bad choices and there's actually some kind of fun performances and set pieces. This doesn't really have anything. It starts off on the worst theme song until Madonna, and it just sets the tone on a boring action sequence, and I just never get into it. Max von Sydow tries his best. The guy who plays the guy with the fake president's eyes, I'm blanking on his name, forgive me.
Mr. Gavin O'Herlihy, also known as not William Atherton on this podcast.
not William Atherton tries his best. Irvin Kushner put a little more effort into the way the movie looked than you would expect from a movie like this. But yeah, you're 100% right. This feels like a lifeless canon film that just happens to have Sean Connery and happens to have the James Bond trademark on it. And I think it's interesting that it exists, but it is a very boring watch.
Adam, your final thoughts.
You know, it's funny, on the last film I said, you know, it sometimes makes you wonder of what could have followed. And this one, it kind of like what could have been. There could have been a really fucking cool movie here if they would have just not been so beholden to the iconic Bond and all that, and really done something sort of different with the character, and it been a swan song for the character, because it doesn't matter, because the franchise is still going to keep going. So why not have fun with it? Why not do something different and sort of unexpected? And they didn't. They just regurgitated the same shit you've seen 100 times to a lesser degree. This movie looks like Cannon filmed it 100%. It looks like Invasion USA. It's crap. It's just generic action crap, especially in the 80s. This fits right along with all of those Cannon action movies. It's a missed attempt to maybe do something cool, but in a way, I'm glad it was unsuccessful and sort of critically panned, because it started to sort of put to bed the iconic sort of stereotype of Bond, the sort of woman abusing, drinking, suave version. This was kind of the last hurrah for that, I think, and I'm good with it for that. But no, it's terrible.
Yeah, it's like those Cannon films, but it doesn't have any of that like earnest, stupid charm of any of those movies that we've talked about, like Cannon films, how much we love when they go brazen, like an Invasion USA or Death Wish 3. But this is more an example of just like if you had one of those movies, but the producers, instead of being just like a vague idea of what people wanted, they knew what anybody wanted with a James Bond movie and did as much as they could legally do, which is to say, like, follow the formula, but without having any of like the interesting traditions or the charms, or really focusing on doing anything that different that would have been compelling. The most interesting thing it does beyond like Thunderball, the one improvement I would say, it doesn't have a 30-minute long underwater fight sequence at the end that lasts for fucking ever.
Yeah, it does last a long fucking time.
No, instead they're in a cave, which is like marginally better, but also very monotonous in its own way, which is just like, it definitely feels like all the new interesting stuff they added mostly just ended up not being that new or interesting. It just kind of felt like weirdly weird and off-putting. Like, we didn't even talk about Rowan Atkinson shows up in this fucking movie as like a comedic relief character.
Johnny English origin movie.
Yep,
Rowan Atkinson in this movie walked so John Cleese in World's Not Enough could run.
That's true. Unfortunately, that's very true. Especially when he comes in at the very end, just like, "Oh, Bond, please come back. M is so distraught. He thinks the world will be destroyed if you don't come back." He's just like, "Sorry, not coming back. I mean it this time."
Fourth wall. Looks right at the camera.
Yep, looks right at the camera. Sending off Sean Connery's Bond in a worse for wear state, for sure. And now, before we get to our next segment, here is an important message from the ESO crew that we fully endorse.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Dr. Geek here with another reminder that the ESO network is pro-science and pro-vaccine. We urge you to be a superhero and protect yourself, your family, and your fellow geeks around the world. Don't be fooled by the forces of evil and their anti-science misinformation campaign. Consult the latest CDC guidelines, your doctor, and get the COVID vaccine today.
Alright, so now it's time for the Double Redo, where every week Adam and I, and, a guest if they're so inclined to, bring up 4 movies total, 2 good ones and 2 bad ones, 2 that we would recommend to you all, and then 2 that we would say you avoid, especially, we're centered around the topic, which, given James Bond is such a massive, huge franchise, there's plenty of options to choose from. And Adam, go ahead and start with yours. What are your 2 good Bond movies and 2 bad ones?
All right. So for one of my good ones, you've already brought it up. And I mean, I can't agree with you more. And we've talked off mic about it, how thrilling and fun it is. And the villain is great and how it's such a breath to the franchise. I have Casino Royale. I think Casino Royale is the perfect representation of Bond as sort of the counter agent aspect of him. He's violent. He's sort of impulsive. He gets the job done, but he's still, again, a dude. He falls in love. He goes through his whole thing where he wants to quit now because he's found his, the purpose to his life, and ultimately sort of the betrayal that comes from that and how wounded he is because of it. It's just great. Daniel Craig's great, especially in his first outing as Bond. Mads Mikkelsen is super solid. I love that Judi Dench is back. It's so fun. I think Casino Royale is a perfect action movie, and a really good James Bond spy movie. And for my second, I have, which I think is probably the best Sean Connery James Bond, I have From Russia with Love. I had not seen this until after I played the actually really good video game that came out based on the movie. And then I went back and watched it, and I think From Russia with Love is just perfect. It's a perfect Sean Connery Bond movie. It is absolutely my favorite of him. It's my favorite representation of him as a character as portrayed by Connery. There's so many iconic moments, iconic lines, everything. It's super thrilling, super fun, super exciting. And then for the bad, I have, as we've talked about, repeatedly over the course of the show, Die Another Day. This movie is preposterous on so many levels. It is the worst CGI Bond stuff that you've ever seen. It is the dumbest villain, especially with the whole plastic surgery idea and all that. I mean, it's so fucking stupid. This movie is fucking terrible. It's just, of course, this was the last Brosnan one, because how the fuck do you redeem yourself after this? It's an atrocious film. And then for my other one, I have Dalton's first, The Living Daylights, which is not necessarily a terrible film, but it's just kind of boring. There's some cool shit to it, but it's just kind of bland overall. I think Timothy Dalton is a very good James Bond. I think he brought a lot of different sort of pathos to the character that we haven't seen before. Love it or hate it, at least it was something new. But unfortunately for his first outing, it was just kind of a bland affair.
I would say with your picks, I mean, I love Casino Royale. I agree. That was probably my favorite just Bond movie in general, especially rewatching it recently. I forgot just how fucking awesome, just right from the opening black and white stuff through the big chase sequence, or even I think the fucking Chris Cornell song is very underrated amongst Bond songs. I love that opening sequence in general. And Vesper is one of my favorite examples of the Bond girl. Gave us Ava Green, basically, who I think is dope. Phenomenal movie. And yeah, From Russia with Love is also my favorite Connery movie. Shout out, of course, to Robert Shaw, Quint himself, as one of my favorite Bond villains who doesn't say much and is so intimidating. It's so good. And then I agree with Die Another Day. It's weird. Die Another Day kind of feels like they saw Austin Powers as such a huge thing, and then they decided to kind of lean into the silliness more and more with the Pierce Brosnan ones, to the point where Die Another Day feels like if you were making a joke about your dad, and then your dad really leaned into the joke to the point where it was no longer funny, and it just came off really fucking sad. That's exactly what Die Another Day feels like. Though Living Daylights, I will say, of the two Dalton ones, I think is my preferred, but then again, I'm not a huge fan of either of the Dalton movies. He's a great example of a very good Bond trapped in lesser material. They're not even the worst movies either of them. They're just, I think, firmly in the middle of the pack for Bond for me.
I'll be honest, Living Daylights was going to be one of my good picks until I saw it was one of your bad picks. I love that movie. I think I'm a sucker for when Bond does two villains, and I really like both Joe Don Baker and the guy who plays Koskov in this. I think that their blonde assassin Necros is one of the best silent henchmen who doesn't have a shtick. He's just a guy with some headphones that are playing some new wave music.
Yeah, the Milkman is awesome. I'll give you that.
I like most of the set pieces. There's not a lot of spying in a lot of Bond movies, unless there's From Russia with Love, which is entirely all in on this is a spy movie. Most of the time it's he walks to a location and then he gets into a fight, and from that fight he goes to a new location and then there's another fight. This one, there actually is spying, him trying to figure out some shit. He has to follow a trail of clues until it finally gets him to side with the Taliban, but let's forget about that part.
He pulls a Rambo 3. I forgot he pulls a Rambo 3.
It's nearly dedicated to the brave Meridian fighters. I do love that movie, though. It's probably in my top 5 of the franchise. I think that it's really fun to watch. The only thing that doesn't work for me is how actively antagonistic he is towards the Bond girl in that movie, in a way where you want her to just bail on him and take her chances just wandering around Europe. I agreed with every pick except for Living Daylights. Yeah, Casino Royale and Pretty Much Would Love fucking rule. From Casino Royale, I'll even say the Die Another Day to Casino Royale, I'm not certain there's another franchise that has as big a gap between the movie and the one that immediately follows it, like in terms of quality. That is such a ricochet.
Oh, now it's time for me to do my choices for the double redo. And I'll go ahead and start with, we were just talking about Die Another Day, the worst Pierce Brosnan. I would argue his best was actually his first with Goldeneye, which was the first time that director Martin Campbell kind of rebooted the character. He would later do the same for Casino Royale, which we've previously mentioned we love. And if not for that movie, this is probably like one of the best examples of especially a Bond starting out so well. I love the way that Pierce Brosnan really gets into that role at this point. He feels like he has that kind of suaveness and gentlemanly nature of a Moore, while having the kind of tough attitude that worked for like a Dalton and a Connery in a way that I think just really stellar. And I especially love his whole back and forth with the Sean Bean character, who ends up being this villain. I just love like that personal stake to the Bond villain in this case. And obviously also Judi Dench's M shows up here, and Alan Cumming is one of my favorite examples of the trope of a hacker who is sort of like on the sidelines. I think he's one of the better examples of that. Probably one of the few good Alan Cumming movies, despite how good a performer he is. It's so good that it's such a bummer that the other Brosnan movies got progressively worse after this point. But then on the other side, I have, somebody who I've, downcried a bit during this episode, but I would say the best example of Roger Moore's era is The Spy Who Loved Me. Especially revisiting it recently, this is the one where it involves a lot of, like, I think the most fun examples of the campy Bond elements, with particularly, like, the submarine car or Jaws, as played by Richard Kiel, one of the best of the henchmen. Also, Barbara Bach is a great Bond girl, I would say. I think she has that same kind of capability angle as some of the Bond girls we've talked about here previously. She's one of the better ones, I would say, for sure. The Carly Simon song is one of the great examples of it's great despite the fact that it doesn't quite fit as a Bond theme kind of thing. I love Nobody Does It Better as a song. I don't know how great it is necessarily as a Bond theme, especially compared to even like Tina Turner's Goldeneye, which is also that's a great example of great song, great Bond theme. This is almost like it's a great #1 single that also happens to be a Bond theme song. But regardless, I think Spy Who Loved Me is definitely, I think, the best example of the silliness of the Moore era, but still done with like a lot of like visual panache and a lot of like stellar set pieces, particularly all the stuff in Egypt, I think is incredible. Some of the best like Bond action set pieces in there for sure. And then for my bad, I have the most recent Bond movie of the Craig era, which I have mixed feelings on the entire Craig era. But I can easily say that of those movies, Spectre is the worst one to me. I think it takes this weird touch of like, we want to have the same kind of gritty look and style of the Craig era. It looks gorgeous, and still Sam Mendes, who did Skyfall directing and doing some like stellar action set pieces at certain points, but it has like such low rent versions of other characters. Like Léa Seydoux' character feels like a lesser version of like the Tracy Bond character in a lot of ways, and fucking this version of Blofeld, you bring back Blofeld for the first time in over like almost 30 years, or over 30 years at that point, and Christoph Waltz's thing is all there mainly just to like get continuity into the Bond series, which Craig really introduced in a way that just felt like it was trying so hard to catch up with the MCU in a bad way. It's a really bad example of trying to like, oh, I'm the author of your pain, even though that makes no sense for like Silva in particular from Skyfall. Like, that makes no fucking sense why you would be the author of his pain. This is so dumb. It was such a note where I'm just like, man, I don't know. I hope No Time to Die gives Craig a much better send-off than that fucking movie could have potentially done. And then I have the other bad pick is the other unofficial Bond movie, which some may argue doesn't count, but it is credited as an adaptation, the first adaptation of Casino Royale, that came out in 1967, and was kind of a spoof that had like a very weird stacked cast for the time, like Peter Sellers, Orson Welles, Woody Allen's also there, David Niven, a bunch of interesting people in that particular cast. The only trouble is it's a 2-hour comedy that is missing laughs. It's dire. It is just like the worst example of like a madcap 60s comedy, that the entire 2-hour runtime is just like, I don't think I laughed like even once. Honestly, it's just like it's an unfunny comedy that also has the weird audacity of kind of being an adaptation of a fucking Bond movie. It's the worst of like both worlds with that. It is, I would say, my least favorite, even compared to Never Say Never Again, of any movies technically actually based on a Bond fucking novel. It is pretty disastrous.
I have actually never seen that one. So I guess there is technically one Bond movie that I have never seen. I think I started it on HBO a year ago, and I never got to the end. I didn't have the same reaction to it that you did, if it is the same movie I'm thinking of, but I also am a lot more sympathetic to 60s comedy than you are. So it's possible that I would get more on board.
It's a mad world, Kaycee. It's not.
Thank you for knowing exactly what I was thinking of.
It's not that.
In fairness, I'm often thinking of that movie.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Goldeneye is in the top 3 for me as far as Bond movies. It's great. I love Pierce Brosnan's first outing as Bond. I love the Bond girls in it. I love Alan Cumming. I think Alec Trevelyan is a great foil to Bond. One of my favorite Sean Bean performances. It's got one of the best Bond themes. It's just a solid movie from front to back. And plus it helps that I played the fuck out of the Nintendo 64 version. The Spy Who Loved Me is my favorite Roger Moore one. He's not necessarily my favorite Bond, but it is his best outing. I absolutely agree. And I've also, I don't know that I've ever seen from front to back the original Casino Royale. And that is because I didn't know it existed until later on in life. And then once I found out Woody Allen was in it, I sort of stayed away from it. Just because, fuck that guy. And it's just, I was good. I'm good on that. And then Spectre, it felt like they were trying too hard to give Bond fans all the shit that they might have grown up with and loved, as far as having Spectre and Blofeld and all the shit. And all of it was done sort of haphazardly. The big reveal that Crystal Waltz is actually Blofeld, like, who didn't see that coming? And yes, I completely agree. I am the one who designed all of your, get fuck off with this. Remember, we were orphans together. You were an orphan. My family took you in and loved you more. Like, okay. So that's Blofeld's fucking reason to hate Bond. I mean, you're just bastardizing everything that's come before. It's so stupid. But I will say Spectre's opening scene with the Day of the Dead thing is still pretty solid. But other than that, terrible film.
There's still some other stuff, like the airplane chase is also pretty good in that. Dave Bautista's fun as a villain. But when it all ends up with that thing where, to quote Patrick H. Willems, they took the plot twist of Austin Powers' Goldmember and treated it seriously.
Oh, fuck, they did.
They fucking did.
Yeah, they totally did. Yeah, they totally did.
But Kaycee, would you say that's your least favorite of the Craig era?
I think so. I would have said Quantum of Solace, but last year when I got the box set and I just marathoned all those movies in a row, I found myself actually not on board with it because it's a movie that doesn't work. But I found it to be the most interesting of the missteps of the franchise, in that it took a big swing and it happened to miss. This didn't really take a swing. It's one of the more egregious examples of there's only 12 characters in the galaxy, as one of my friends puts it. Anytime there's a sudden relationship that between two people, that it does not need to be there. Yeah, I don't hate it, but I'm very meh on it to a point where I don't think I'm ever going to go back and watch again, except maybe one more time before No Time to Die.
Well, Kaycee, as the Bond person, I know you do have some Double Reduce prepared, correct?
I do. And y'all picked most of what I was going to say, but that is good because I can recommend ones that people might not necessarily think of. My recommendations, I will go with Roger Moore's debut, Live and Let Die, which, while we have mentioned is the start of Bond chasing trends, this is Bond chasing blaxploitation. It is still really fun. It's very high energy. There's some great 70s New York cinematography, great 70s Caribbean cinematography, high chaos. Very silly, but silly in a way that's very endearing. And what shocked me going through it, watching it last summer, I was thinking maybe in this moment a Bond blaxploitation film is going to feel way too tasteless. It was remarkable how good Yaphet Kotto was, in that he realized I need to go all in and give a great fucking performance just in order to make this work at all. And it's one of the best performances of a villain in the franchise. It is oddly nuanced in a way that is not there in the script, and I love that. Jane Seymour, again, some unfortunate implications with it, but that is her big screen debut, and she is pretty damn fun in that as well. I think the action scenes leading up to everything before the guy exploding is pretty terrific. I think that it moves at a great click. This is a shocker. Paul McCartney sometimes writes good songs, and this, as a result, this is one of the best Bond songs. Yeah, that is my first recommendation. My other one, again, as Thomas was saying about the Pierce Brosnan movies on a steady decline, the one good one before that decline keeps going is Tomorrow Never Dies, which I know I besmirched earlier with Bond's fighting Rupert Murdoch, but he's played by Jonathan Pryce. I think that movie actually has kind of aged very well, and that is Bond taking on fake news and 24-hour news cycles being used as propaganda in order to offset real world violence. And I think that it ends up being very fun. I'm a big fan of history in the William Randolph Hearst Spanish-American War. You provide the pictures, I provide the war. And this is taking that to an extreme in a way that I'm not going to say feels realistic, but it feels like a thought progression on where news media was in the 1990s, and I think that holds up really well. I think Michelle Yeoh is pretty fun in it, and I think that in terms of the Brosnan films, obviously GoldenEye reigns supreme, but I think that this one tends to be overlooked because people focus on GoldenEye, and I think that it works in its own right. For my two bad picks, and I will preface this again with, I think I said at the beginning, something along the lines of, I have a hard time outright saying don't watch this. But I will say that if you're sitting down with people and you're showing them Bond movies, I would not show them these ones, especially if you're just looking to have a good time that night. The first is Roger Moore's second film, The Man with the Golden Gun, which has a pretty fun third act with him going on a duel with Christopher Lee. But before that, it is boring. There is just not a lot of story there, and they have to pad it out with this weird thing with a solar energy crisis that Bond is trying to resolve, and that has to also tie in with the Francisco Scaramanga stuff in a way that feels weird and forced in, and it just does not work. It is pretty much a slog up until the third act, and the third act only happens because the Bond girl in it, Goodnight, is one of the most incompetent characters in any Bond movie, to the point where literally everything she does nearly gets Bond killed, and you just want to pull your hair out. And the other one is Pierce Brosnan's The World Is Not Enough. It's not as bad as Die Another Day. I do really like Robert Carlyle in it, and I do like the twin villains. It doesn't work as well as the previous two films. It feels like the franchise is running out of steam and does not quite know what to do in a post-Cold War Bond, but also isn't quite ready to go more Jason Bourne-esque with the Daniel Craig films. And it just is kind of floating in the wind, oddly enough. It's a very blah movie, and it has a few moments, but it's just not terribly exciting.
Yeah, okay, so to get on to your good picks, Live and Let Die, I don't know how often I've seen it, but I do know the theme, and it might be the best James Bond theme. If not, it's definitely in contention in the top 5. It's just a fantastic theme. I can't tell you the last time I seen it though, so I'm having a hard time sort of remembering a lot about it. But again, Moore was never really my Bond. And then Tomorrow Never Dies, I hated it when I first saw it. I thought it was such a fucking poor follow-up to Goldeneye. But after going back, within the last couple of years and rewatching all the Brosnan ones, it's easily the second best. I mean, without question. And Jonathan Pryce is super fun in it, but Michelle Yeoh fucking slaps in it. Like, she's great. What a great sort of Bond girl she is, because she is the antithesis of sort of the ultra capable, badass sort of modern version of a Bond girl. Like, she's fucking fantastic in it. And then The Man with the Golden Gun, I really liked it because of Scaramanga. Like, I thought he was super fun, and I love Christopher Lee and everything. But I rewatched that probably within the last couple of years, and it is so hokey and over the top. But still, it's enjoyable. But I get what you're saying, to where if you're going to show somebody a Bond movie, that would not be the one to lead off with, 100%. And then The World Is Not Enough. I really like that one too because of Robert Carlyle and Electra. Forgive me, I can't remember her name either. But he's super fun in it as Renard. He's a good villain. But again, it does feel exactly like how you said it. They kind of don't know what to do moving forward. So they're just sort of, well, maybe let's kind of copy things we've already done before, but try to update it with sort of technology and things like that. Like it just ultimately falls a little flat. But I still think it's not the worst Brosnan. I think they directly go in order of how bad they are, his 4 movies.
It's charting a slide downward.
That's true. I definitely agree with that. By the way, Sophie Marceau, this woman who played
yeah.
Yes, and I agree. She's one of the bright spots for that one, which I mean I've said before. It's the first one I saw and did not leave the best first impression. I will say that with Tomorrow Never Dies, I agree with especially that Michelle Yeoh is very good, and I think I wish if anything there was more Jonathan Pryce. But also, it's not my favorite Bond movie, but it has one of my favorite Bond sequences, which is the whole thing where he's talking with the hitman played by Vincent Schiavelli, who's one of my favorite fucking character actors. Such a stellar scene that works almost isolated. It's just oh my god, this is one of the great Bond sequences. I just wish there was just more of either that tone or a lot more of especially him and Michelle Yeoh just kicking ass. There's that one I would agree. It's the only other watchable fucking Brosnan era Bond movie for sure. I'm so glad somebody has the tenacity to admit that Man with the Golden Gun is a fucking boring movie. That's one of those ones that's so overrated to me. I don't get I like Christopher Lee. He's there, and there's some kind of stuff I agree. The third act shootout, I think there's some fun stuff there, but it is so fucking dull before it gets to that third act. And you're right, it's a 2-hour movie where there's no story going on. There's only Hervé Villechaize popping around just because he was on fucking Fantasy Island at that point. That's it. Really, but I think Live and Let Die is the second best more Bond. I think there's a lot of really fun set pieces. I agree that Yvette Koto's super awesome. Also, I don't know which actor this is. I apologize. The guy who plays the dude with the voodoo paint is one of my favorite henchmen.
Oh yeah, Baron Samedi. I'm forgetting his name. He is still alive and goes to conventions last I checked.
That dude is phenomenal. I just love anytime he shows up, or even especially the bit where Moore starts shooting at what looks like him. It just dissipates into paper mache version of him basically. I think there's a lot of fun there. Obviously, the Live and Let Die is another one, kind of the Nobody Does It Better, where it works so perfectly as a number one single. I didn't know that was a Bond theme until so late in my life that I was astonished. But yeah, let's go ahead and repeat our titles here for everybody out there. Go ahead, Adam, start first with repeat your titles.
I had for the good Casino Royale and From Russia with Love, and for the bad I had The Living Daylights and Die Another Day.
For me, I had my 2 good were Goldeneye and The Spy Who Loved Me, and my 2 bad were Spectre and Casino Royale from 1967.
And my 2 good were Live and Let Die and Tomorrow Never Dies. My 2 bad were Man with the Golden Gun and The World Is Not Enough.
All right, and before we continue, you fucks, there's 7 definitive Bonds. I mean, 6 arguably, but maybe 7 if you count one of them. I don't count the guy who played Jimmy Bond and sort of the TV movie that existed, because why would you? But I want kind of everybody's right off the cuff, if you have it. If not, you might already have it listed, because I know I do. But I want your ranking of Bonds. We'll throw it to Kaycee first. He's the guest.
Okay.
Go ahead,
yes.
Kaycee.
Okay, Roger Moore is my favorite. I do acknowledge the Connery films are better, but I do find him much more charming, and I think that he is more, I guess, the Bond you want to get a beer with, even if the beer is going to be way overpriced. Then Sean Connery, then Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan. Actually, no. I'm going to put Timothy Dalton, Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, and George Lazenby.
And so David Niven would be your last, I'm guessing? Oh, yeah, you never seen it. Yes, so, yeah, David would be your last. That's fair. Thomas?
I mean, well, I'd probably honestly say, I think just because of the attachment I have to, like, a Casino Royale, and even I'm also a fan of Skyfall, I would say Daniel Craig's probably my number one. But then right underneath him, I would probably say probably Connery, then probably Brosnan, then I guess Moore, and then Dalton, and then all the various different Bonds from Casino Royale 1967. Or no, wait, I'm sorry. So, Lazenby is above those guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
yeah. Mine, I would actually go Brosnan, believe it or not, because Brosnan was when I was like a little bit younger, and Goldeneye really made an impression on me. And even though his movies suck, I think Brosnan is sort of the perfect mix of the Roger Moore Connery, where he's charming but he's also, kind of a badass. 2, I put Craig, then I'd go Connery, and then I go Dalton, because I absolutely love Timothy Dalton's interpretation, even though the movies are Then I go Roger Moore, then I go Lazenby, and then I go Niven.
Yes, so I guess those are our rankings as well. Submit your rankings and double redos of sorts to us at our various socials. We'll mention here as we do our exit from this particular episode. We want to thank some people, though. We want to thank Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Christian Thor Lally for our artwork. Please make sure to follow him at Night of Water. That's night with a K _of _water for all his great artwork on Twitter. And there's also a link tree there where you can find all his different socials. And also thank you to our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/DEDBpod, where every month you get to listen to bonus episodes that we record, whether it be On the Edge of Relevance, where we cover new and upcoming movies like maybe No Time to Die. If and when that comes out on October 8th, we'll cover it shortly after that point. And then also vote in polls for like topics and movies that we cover. And then also we put out at least one major bonus episode every month. And around the same time this is out, you will be able to listen to our audio commentary released this month, where we talked about a little undersung movie you probably haven't heard of, called The Dark Knight. Is that how you pronounce the title, Adam?
I mean, is it?
I think it's Knigget.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
So you'll be able to listen to us talk about it and watch along as we talk about the great Christopher Nolan film starring Christian Bale and Heath Ledger and Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman, The Dark Knigget. But we also have to thank somebody else here. Of course, we have to thank our own 007 of a guest here, Mr. Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, thank you for coming on. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at Twitter at TheKacer, THE_KACER. You can find me on Instagram. I think it's just my name, KayceeJarrard. You can support my work by voting in your local elections in November, as long as you're not voting for a Republican. Yeah, that's me.
Yes, and for more of us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod. That's where we'll share a bunch of like the episodes of the show and little trivia factoids and such via tweets of sorts. And you can also send us feedback, doubleedgeddoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And if you can't support us on the Patreon for just the $1 a month, that's fine. Another way you can help us out is by going to the ESOT Public Store. There'll be a link in the description here, where you can buy some merchandise with our logo on it. Yes, you can buy a coffee cup, you can buy a tote bag, you can buy all sorts of stuff with our logo, and that helps out. We get a bit of a kickback from that. So and it would help out if they did what?
Buy out a match. Buy out match.
Oh, yes. All the tenacity of Never Say Never Again era Bond. Perfect.
Yep.
She gives so much of a shit.
I might have done better.
Well, I mean, it's not a hard barrel to like go over, basically. But for more of our own individual antics, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy, where I post musings of all sorts. I also do some writing at both my personal blog, marianithomas.wordpress.com, and film-cred.com.
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Atom or Adam. That's ATOM_OR_ADAM. And you can also find me on Letterboxd at Schwanson, SCHWANDTSON.
And if you want to subscribe to hear more of our auditory antics here, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platforms that you might listen to. If you're listening on ESO, the great ESO network, why not listen to all the other great shows on there? Or also you can dig into our archives on our Podbean main feed. That's where we have several episodes we did even before we joined ESO. And everything else, if you can't support the Patreon, if you can't buy the merchandise, the completely a free way to help us out is to rate, review, or share the show around. That gives us more visibility out there in the ether.
Yeah, and I'm not going to yell at you guys this time, because I got some people pointed out that I was yelling at you. But hey, can you please do us a favor and share our stuff? Please? You fucks.
Please, sir, I want to share. Please. Shout out, by the way, to Konya Hida Mala, who literally tweeted that she was just like, I'm doing this so Adam doesn't yell at me. But now, Adam, it's time that we ended this rather long episode of the show with our picking for next week's show. We do this at the end of every episode. Adam and I each have 2 good and 2 bad choices. We switch up on the quality for that. In this case, Adam has 2 good choices. I have 2 bad choices for next week's topic. And we've assigned numbers between 1 and 10 for each of our choices. So the other person or a guest, in the case of, say, a Kaycee being here, picks number between 1 and 10, and whichever that is closest to of the 2 good and 2 bad choices, that ends up being the good and bad choice. Though keep in mind, we do have the Godfather rule in our back pocket, where at some point between now and May of 2022, Adam and I have 1 veto that we can pull out. If we hear a choice, the first choice, we have the option to potentially take the cannoli, which means that we veto that particular choice. It is not going to be the one that we choose, and we decide to go with whatever the other choice is that we have not heard from the other person. So we still have both of those in our pockets, and we may use them while doing our picking for next week. It's time, guys. October's here. We love doing spooky episodes, so it's time to start off the spooky Halloween season episodes.
Yeah.
And Adam, what are we starting off with? What's our first topic for October?
We are starting off with occult films. So basically anything that involves, a cult or anything loosely based. Some of the prime examples, classic examples, I would say would be like Wicker Man or things like that. It's a pretty nifty little subgenre.
Yes, and we love covering subgenres on here and also doing some other interesting things. We're very excited about the October season. And like I said, Adam has his 2 good choices. I have my 2 bad. So Kaycee, please, for his 2 good choices, number between 1 and 10.
So, favorite Bond movies on Her Majesty's Secret Service, that's a 6-1. So I will say 6.
All right. At number 8, I have a movie that was kind of released in 2020. It was, the pandemic obviously really hurt it and things like that. And also kind of a bad title, but if you haven't seen it, it's so worth it. I have The Empty Man.
Ooh, okay. This was a movie I remember literally watching because I've heard some interesting little cult rumblings in its own right, cult attention to it. And I immediately texted Adam and said, this is an Adam movie. You should watch it.
And I watched it, and I'm like, oh, this is definitely my shit. This is an Adam movie. And it 100% is. It is fucking awesome.
So, for all that alone, I can't possibly take the cannoli on this one. I will not. I'm very excited to talk about The Empty Man and recommend everyone else watch it. I believe it's on HBO Max right now, as it won't record it.
It is. Yeah, as of right now. And then at number 1, I had another one that we've sort of discussed off mic several times, but never really done a show on it. I had Hereditary.
Okay, yeah. One that I really love, and I know you mostly love, aside from some stuff near the end. Yes.
3/4 of it, maybe.
Yes. So, right. Stellar. So now, Kaycee, for my 2 bad choices, please pick a number between 1 and 10.
Okay, I'm going with 10, which is the number for Spy Who Loved Me, my second favorite.
Okay. Well, over at number 9, I had one from a controversial filmmaker we've never discussed on the show, but I'd be fascinated to talk about, especially for one that I was not a fan of when I first saw it, but has gotten a reappraisal, especially I would say in the last 10 years since it came out or so. I have Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem.
Hey, I'm definitely one of the fans of that one. Noise. Yeah, so therefore you can, I'm not taking that cannoli. Not going to do it. Not gonna do it.
But then on the opposite side of things, over at number 3, I had one from another interesting visionary filmmaker that kind of came and went, though I know this one has its fans as well. I have Gore Verbinski's A Cure for Wellness.
I've not seen that one.
I don't hate that movie. I think it got really critically lambasted at the time it came out. I think that one has interesting ideas. Kind of like a lot of Gore Verbinski's movies where I either love them or I have very mixed feelings on them. That's more of a mixed feelings one.
Isn't what's his name in that? Box Office Poison.
Dane DeHaan.
Yeah, there he is. That's him. That's the one.
And also that was, I think, the last time they gave him a big studio movie because that bombed horribly, and then he's just kind of been fluttering around occasionally in places. But Lords of Salem and The Empty Man, 2 very interesting movies. We'll have a lot to say about next time. But until that next time, everybody, just know that Double-Edged Double Bill will return.
Or will it? I don't know. This might be the last one.
Who knows? We never know. You know what? We have all the time in the world to figure that out.
You and Kaycee can make a shitty remake of this show.
Yeah, man.
Never Edge again.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.